Okay, so I'm going to do something, and probably gonna take a minute or two before I get it because I do need to get this. I need to get this sent to people in my college classes. I do need to get this sent, so uh, I do need to see what they're trying to do before I start sending them random. Because I don't want to send them like a meme or something. Because there is the meme that someone sent me. It's just named racism. Like there is it's just named racism. Like there's no other context, just racism.mov. I was like, what? Well, since when did somebody send me this? Like what? Ugh. I gotta figure out what. It's hilarious. I don't know why to me, but it's funny. It shouldn't be funny, but it is. God, where did I put it? Okay, here it is. Okay, there we go. Now I got it. Okay, now we're on the track. So it should be not too long from now before I get this sent, and then we can finally discuss how this would work, and better yet, who comes out on top. With that being said, I gotta figure things out real quick. Yeah. Okay. Bam. Now let's discuss. Let us discuss the battle tactics that would be used by both sides. Oh, they. How did they already respond? I just sent it to them. How the hell did they already respond? Okay, well, they already responded. So I'll read about that later. Now let's finally begin the discussion about what would happen if the Crimson Army began the invasion of their continent, and could they win against a world coalition? Could they? That's the question. And it'll depend on a few factors. But it's not as one sided as you may think. Because it's like, oh, well, they've got bad equipment. Yeah, but as you heard from Stalin himself, quantity has a quality of its own. It There really is such a thing as there can be so many things that you just can't fight it. But when the technology is similar to yours, it does not matter how bad that technology is. If it's like 2 decades behind, it doesn't matter. If you're outnumbered 5-1, you're not going to take that thing out. And one of the best things to compare this to is the Sherman and the Tiger. The Tiger was developed during World War II, so is the Sherman. The difference being the technology used by both sides was similar. And people are like, oh, well, the Germans, they used better technology. No, they really didn't. They had technology that was already there for years, and they only just beefed it up. And I say, quote unquote, beefed it up because it didn't work half the fucking time. So you can't exactly say it's better technology if it doesn't work. You can't say it's better tech. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. That's the point. Even if you know it's better and it doesn't work, it doesn't matter if it's better on paper or not. It's proved that it is not better. And this is the problem that the Crimson Army is going to immediately face. Well, not the problem, but I guess the benefit is that they've got more soldiers than any other nation on the planet. And now they're able to just steamroll right through any country without really having anything to fight. Because at this time, most nations are in a timeline of peace. But yet again, it does take time for a pretty big army to be built and sent out. And we clearly saw that with the Germans. Like it took them months just to arm about 1 million people. And it took them months to do that. Now, granted, this is a different universe, so there's different rules that apply here. They already have an army that's like 4.5. Holy hell, my 4.5 million. And before their demilitarization, they had 11 million during a very rough time. They had 11 million soldiers during peacetime. They will not hesitate on sending in tens of millions of people to die. They are not afraid of doing that, especially when a leader that could be put into power. And keep in mind, it is still up. And if you vote, there could potentially be World War III. And it will be against, as you could probably guess, the Crimson Army. So the question that now remains is it even possible? Could a continental invasion from the Crimson Army be even possible? Well, if I look at the map and where they have to invade in order to conquer, it's looking like it's a big yes. How their continent is made is that the only difference, the only land barrier that they have to cross is a canal. Well, probably more than one, but they have to cross a giant canal that is used for shipping across the planet. And if they can't cross that, they can't invade the rest of they can't invade the rest of the landmass that is connected to that continent. So this becomes a war of attrition rather than just a simple war between literal giants just battling it out. Now this becomes a war of attrition similar to that of World War II, where both sides are trying to get a one up on one another, and when they find an advantage, they're going to press it as hard as they can until either they can't do it no more or the enemy can't fight no more. This is how the war would go, and it's because the manpower advantage. The Zionist Union has way too many people. They have over 500 million people in their borders. And if they use like 20%, 25%, they can get 100 million people into the military. Do you have any idea in any slight how hard that would be to do? Now, granted, it wouldn't be their morale would be pretty low, and they just wouldn't have the capacity to fight the same way. But the way how this would work is that their forces would be able to attack pretty well. However, I'm going to tell you that one of the major key things is that I don't think they'd get too far. I don't truly believe they could invade the entirety of the landmass. I think there's too many people and they have to occupy it with all their force. They can't invade everywhere. But there is something I need to say before it gets forgotten. The Sonoman Empire. Now, obviously, the Sonoman Empire was attacked years ago by Judea. Judea is like, oh well, if you're fine with us, we're not going to invade you anymore. We'll trade with each other because we got port cities and territory within the continent that you're in. We're able to trade with you fairly easily. And they're like, okay, yeah, that's fair. We lost the war fair and square, and now they have the ability to come back into the war. So we're going to do it in case both instances of they joined the war against, well, actually, there would be three instances. One, they would join the Allies against the Zionist army. Number two, they would join against the Zionist, they would join with the Zionist army and begin to attack the Allies. Or three, they'd stay out of it. Knowing how important this war is, there's a possibility they might join it. There is a possibility, but they would need to be leveraged in. And they have more people than the Zionist army. They have more people than the Zionist Union. So they could really tip the balance of power. They really could. Because in that it includes if they join the Zionist Union in the fight. If they join the Zionist Union, oh Lord above, the Allies are going to be in some serious deep shit. And I'm not joking with this. Like, this is bad news. Because here's what that means. If they join the Allied powers and they begin naval blockading Judean ports and begin attacking the Judeans, not only would it catch them off by surprise, but they would have the continent by themselves again. And invading the continent could probably result in millions of deaths, both by Judeans, both for Judeans and the defending forces. So now it's about what side would they realistically join? Nobody knows. There's not enough information. Basically, it's about the benefits and risks. If they feel that the Judeans are taking advantage of them, there's a bigger risk with being their ally than their enemy. And it starts to slowly shift to that. However, they're not taking advantage of those people. Zelbians are keeping a close eye on them because they know that if they take advantage of those people, they might join the Zionist Union in their fight. And even Zelbia is like, we're not doing that. They outnumber Zelbia over 2.5 times to 1. Zelbia can be an industrial power, but if the Sonoman Empire industrialized and westernized too, who's going to stop them? There'll be a second Zionist Union right there on their doorsteps. And that's the main problem, is like, they're not industrialized, but if someone gives those guys weapons, oh Lord, oh hell will break loose. Oh hell. The Judeans won't stand a chance. The Tuscany fleet won't stand a chance. There's just no way they could win at that point. And that means the entire conquest of about a quarter of the planet's surface would be inevitable. That's inevitable. That's not if, it's inevitable. Again, you have almost a quarter of the population of the entire planet fighting not even a quarter of the population of the planet. You've got Zelbia, you've got Tuscany, you've got Judea. All the countries unified have less people than the Sonoman Empire. And now you add in another 500 million for the Zionist Union. They're outnumbered over 2 to 1. In our timeline, we outnumbered the Germans, and even we struggled. That kind of brings into perspective just how badly we'd be screwed if we actually fought them. But another thing I also need to get out is Zelbia. As with every major war before, they are another oddball. Because unlike the Sonoman Empire, they have not just a lot of people, they have the ability to mobilize faster than any other country on the planet. That is thanks, in fact, to their motorization, mass production, and overall material production. They produce more wood, more steel, copper, nickel, manganese, oil, you name it. Good portion of that they produce. They produce over 3/4 of the world's oil. There is no way in the world they could lose. And that's the key thing. If they've got allies, there's no way the allies are losing. The allies will have more than enough fuel, more than enough rations, more than enough resources to provide for all of their industries. There's no way the allies are losing. But I also do think one of the major areas that would be safe from the Zionist Union would be the northern tip of the continent, actually very close to the Zionist Union, which is Anzoli, which is the Italy of the continent. And then you have the maybe about 2 million square miles extra for protective casing before Anzoli. I would say that would be realistic simply because the supply lines to get to that area are now increased because of a naval blockade, and the Zionist Navy's practically, it doesn't exist. And that's the key thing. It will take them thousands of miles to get to that border. But for Zelbia, all it takes is a straight shot. So that's a complete different ballgame. One will take weeks, potentially months to resupply. One will take just a week or maybe 2 weeks at most. And you see, that's the key takeaway here, is that that would be a safe place because of how close it is to Zelbia. If Zelbia joined the war, the nations near them are also safe because their navy will be going around and blockading the entire east side of the continent, while Tuscany, Duchovny, and Judea's navy will block this side, the other side, Now, if the Ottoman Empire does join in, Judea will need support from other countries. So they will have to get support from, I would say, if Anzoli and Tuscany are able to create a task force, they might be able to send troops. And because the Zionist Navy is non existent, that means all their shipping can be targeted, all of their naval assets can be targeted, including port cities. And that means everything that they're capable of using for ocean combat, including aircraft, will be targeted. And that's the key thing here is they got to limit the ability for the Zionist Union to project their power. If they're unable to do that, the Zionist Union will control the entire continent that they're currently on. And if they get the assistance of the Ottoman Empire, they might as well have won the war. That's the key thing. They didn't want the Ottoman Empire to lean towards the Zionist Union. They wanted them to lean towards literally anything but the Zionist Union. They even said, we don't care, just don't support them. We don't care what you do. If you don't want to fight, cool. Don't fight. We'll still trade with you. You'll still make money. Your economy will still grow. It will not change a thing. And the Ottoman Empire would likely agree. Okay, well, I don't know why all of a sudden my camera has decided that it is not going to work properly. Okay, now that the camera has decided it's going to work properly again, we're back on track. The Zionist Union could easily overwhelm the continent, could easily invade every country, could easily take them out. And to me, it's not about the resources or that. It's not even about the oil because they produce enough oil to fuel themselves. And with the rest of the continent, they probably simply could easily produce enough. It's like they produce more than enough. They're the world's second largest oil producer. They're gonna be fine. And it's not even about the resources. It's about who can get a major advantage logistically over the other side. And sadly, this is where the Zionist Union begins to fall apart because this is where everything goes downhill. The logistics of the Zionist Union are able to be tacked at almost any degree in almost any way possible. I mean, if you paid attention to some of the things that I've said and that their nation has to do, they know they don't have a navy. Their air force is going to be really limited. That means air cover for resources and convoys non-existent. They could just send in aircraft and bombers and bomb the whole countryside and kill hundreds of thousands of their soldiers without even have to fight them. And you see, that's the key takeaway here, is that it doesn't matter how good or how fast initially they can get that force out. The Allies have air superiority. It doesn't matter what the Zionist Union thinks they can do. The Allies have air superiority. And they even teach their people, like, hey, listen, we got to get this war done. And if we don't fight them and we don't win after a certain point, we can't fight this war, period. Because there's nothing to fight. We've already lost. And this is similar to how the Soviets would have done after Europe. Like, let's say if they fought the Americans after Europe. This is similar to what would happen. They would have initial successes, but the Allies would still have air superiority. They would not be able to lose a ground war simply because they have air superiority, they've got naval superiority, and that's what's happening in this timeline. They have air and naval superiority. They have thousands of ships comparison to probably 100 or so for the Zionist Union. There's no way they're losing. Zelby alone could destroy their navy, no problem. And then that's excluding the fact that they can mobilize and do all that. So that's basically saying it doesn't give a shit whether the Zionist Union can fight back their forces or not. The end result is the exact same every single time. And that is one of the very few things that I want to talk about. But now we can get to the actual fun part. The part where how far would they actually go and would they win? Now let's get into that part. Part one. This is the initial, this is where I'm going to say what they would likely be able to accomplish in the beginning stages of the war, which is up to a couple months, maybe a year or so. Within 1 or 2 years, they would be able to occupy, I would think, due to how big the continent is, I would say they would be able to occupy a really big portion of the continent. And their air force initially would be able to knock out many parts of the continent. They would be able to do that. The Allies, like Anzoli, Tuscany, Duchovny, these three powers would simply be able to hold on to small pockets of the continent, but they pretty much conquered the entire continent. There's no way of fighting it all back just yet. They don't have the capacity to fight back the Zionist army. They don't have to fight. They can't fight the Crimson Army in the current situation. So what do? They're now able to initially, hopefully, in this part one, if they do manage to cross the canal, the main canal that separates both continents. If they do, it will not matter. But for part one, I would say that initially the initial progress for the Crimson Army would be staggering, similar to how Japan did. It would be staggering. They'd be able to conquer a good portion of the continent, be able to threaten Tuscany, Duchovny, and even Anzoli. They're able to threaten these powers and be able to keep their air forces down on the ground. However, as I've said, these attacks are with speed, not with power. And as everybody knows, power will always catch up to you. And this is where, in part two, things turn for the worse for them. In part two, this is where everything turned around. Because Zelbia would likely have to make a choice in part one. Would they enter the war? Would they not? But, as I've said, we're going to make this realistic to the universe. Zelbia, even in this timeline, is still isolationist. It does not want to intervene. It is not the world superpower. It does not want to intervene, and it's a consumer special. It doesn't want to do anything. It doesn't want to do that. But if the Zionist Union accidentally bombs a few Zelbian ships, oh, that's the beginning of the end. Because this is what this means for the Allies. Most of the oil now goes straight to the Allies. No questions asked. That immediately puts the Zionist Union at a drastically bad position. Really bad. The Allies now have more supplies and resources than the Zionist Union, even when holding an entire continent. They're not going to win. You can't win against that. There's nothing you can do to fight that at all. Now this is when it becomes bad. Likely, Zelbian warships would be able to blockade the other side of the continent. Now, a full blockade of Zionist resources is inevitable, because now the Allies can block from one side with Tuscany, Duchovny, and Judea, the other side, which is full Zelbian fleet. And I would think that due to how many ships they have, they wouldn't be destroyed initially, but they would try to keep them and move them around so that the Allies can't hit them. But now they got to do whatever it takes. I would say Zelbia would probably use about 75 warships to blockade the other side of the country rather than the occupied zones, because there's no reason to blockade that entire section. There's no reason at all. They're going to find a way to either smuggle it in or find a way to do that. They want to remove the resource production from their homeland. They don't want to just remove everything else. Most of their food comes from their homeland. Blockading their homeland means most of their iron, most of their resource, all their main metals, food, supplies, all of that comes straight there. And if you blockade that, it's game over. And it will take just a few years to starve out entire resistance moves. But I would think that eventually, given enough time, the Continental Navy would have to fight against the Crimson Navy. And once and for all, the battle will be extremely bloody. The Zelbians realistically would have between 10, not 101, 10 to 12 carriers. While the Zionist Union, because it has more people and more, it will likely have all of its 17 carriers in the battle. And their carriers don't carry as much aircraft. They only carry 50 to 60, as Zelbian carriers can carry up to 90. So it's a very clear indication on who has the advantage. And it's Zelbia. They can store more fighters per carrier, and because of how their navy works, they're able to shape up the fighters on other carriers. Well, if that is tried with the Crimson Navy, it won't work. And I think this is going to be very bad for the Crimson Navy. Their radar is horrible. They're not able to see the Zelbians before the Zelbians see them, and it just turns into a bloodbath. I would say for Zelbia's losses, I would say at worst, one carrier, 3 destroyers, and 2 cruisers. And keep in mind, that's at worst. But the Crimson Navy, in the meanwhile, suffers horribly. Out of the, I would say, 150 warships, out of all those warships, they would likely lose that's how much they would lose. And the reason why, they have outdated equipment, outdated everything. That's a different story when just having one thing that's outdated. Not only that, their leadership is really lackluster. It's based more off of loyalty to the state rather than the merit of the individual. That's the key takeaway. And because of that, Zelbia lost significantly less, even though they had half the fleet. And they would likely lose probably about, well, Zelbia would lose about 174 aircraft. I would say for the Zionist Union, they would lose between 500 to 600 aircraft, easily. The losses of the Zionist Union here would be irreplaceable. Because the Allies now have full control over their navy, it's impossible. So this is part 2. Part 2 is Allied progress is finally being shown. They would likely be able to push up slightly towards the Zionist Union, possibly even do raids on the coast of the Zionist Union, which shows that they're now capable of hitting their country directly. And now we get part 3, Endgame. And this is where the Zionist Union will fight to the bitter end with all of their over 100 million soldiers. And the Allies, at this point, would likely have similar numbers to that, if not more. As Zelbia would mobilize, Udea would mobilize, Tuscany Dutch of Neonzoli, all of these powers would finally mobilize, and they would likely have between 100, I would say about 140, 150 million. At this point, the Zionist Union is defeated. There's nothing they can do. Their best bet is to shorten their supply lines, narrow the amount of supply lines they have, and protect those with the remaining air cover they have. That's smart. And the reason why you don't expand it and do that because is that their vehicles are slow, but they're extremely well not slow. They're extremely well armored and they're fast. And in small numbers, they can deploy resources over a wider front. All they have to do is narrow it down and spread out from there. That's what their plan would likely be in order to minimize losses via aircraft and to be able to shoot down the most allied aircraft. But at this point, they would likely have losses that are well into their world version of World War II losses, which would be 25 to 35 million. At this point, but as I've said, it's not everything. Now you've got something else to look forward to because now you've got the second part, and this is only a fraction of what would really. The Allies would realistically lose not as much, probably around 10 to 15 million. But yet again, you can clearly see the losses are worse than World War One, and now they're closing in on World War Two. But the final stages would likely kill more because now they're going to likely force civilians to stand up. And now all of a sudden, they've got massive amounts of soldiers fighting, and now they've got civilians doing their dirty work. So now, to me, it's rather a matter of it's just a matter of who's going to resist better. And the obvious choice would be the Allies. The Allies will have full dominant. They will be dominant. But at the end of the conflict, I think due to just how hard that it would be to invade the mainland of the Zionist Union, I would think the war would go on for more than just a handful of years. I think this is a war that would likely go on for 8 to 9 years. And keep in mind, these losses are only about halfway through realistically. So, in reality, losses to the Zionist Union might actually be World War II levels, while the Allies would lose like just over World War One losses. And I'd say about that. That is over 100 million deaths across the entire board. And then Zelbia is not safe from this either. They will likely lose millions of people too. This is a war that nobody wants, and atomic bombings is just inevitable. The Zelbians would likely use the 9 atomic bombs they have, and realistically, if they drop them on major cities or a major city like Moscow, they're going to do some serious damage. I would say they would probably damage or kill or have the ability to kill within after a month to an extra 2 million more people. This is when the war would end and would likely have the Allies signing this treaty that just shits all over the Zionist Union. They would probably collapse after this or would suffer a civil war. Who knows? But you see, that's the key takeaway here. The Zionist Union could only win if the son of an empire had help. Now, I will be right back to grab something. I will be right back. Now we get to finally discuss the oddballs. I've already said that this was what would realistically happen, but yet there's always a chance for this not to happen. This is the best chance of what would happen. But now I get to talk about the what ifs. What if Zelbia doesn't join the war? What if they stay out? Or what if the Son of an Empire joins? All right. First one, if Zelbia did not join the war, everything would be different. And it really would be different. The Zydus Navy would still be out there, and they would likely be able to decommission ships and start building submarines because the Zelbians are not taking part of the other side of the continent. Anole would start feeling really bad pain in terms of their supply lines, and eventually they might actually have to surrender. And if that's the case, Duchovny needs to really work on how to defeat the Zydus Union, because now they can send millions, possibly tens of millions of soldiers down there, and everything will change. And I think if the Zelbians don't join the war, it really will change everything. And if that's the case, it might lead to the second thing, the Sonoman Empire. And depending on who's in charge or how the people feel about the Judean Empire, about do they think it's worse than the Zionist Union? If they don't believe that it's worse, they're likely not going to join the war unless the Zionist Union attacks them directly and they're like, okay, now you've done pissed us off. Now we're going to join in the war. Then that's a different story. Then it'll be similar to what happened in our timeline, just with the liberation of Anole and Zoli being a little more costly to the Allies. Basically, something of the similar sort would happen, and eventually, I think Duchovny or Tuscany would create an atomic bomb, and now something similar happens, but with way less people, well, way more people killed, and it's just horrible. I do not really. You can't really see through how horrible of a conflict this would be. That's terrifying to really think about. But it's true, and this would happen in their universe. But what, as I said, what happens if, let's just say, the Zelbians are in the war and they're fighting with the Allies and they're against the Zionist Union? But what if the Sonoman Empire joined the Zionist Union? Well, a war that will last even longer than just 8 to 9 years. This will likely kill an entire generation off the face of the planet. And I am 100% certain the Zionist Union and the Sonoman Empire would still lose due to who has naval supremacy and the economics and the logistics of it all. They would still lose. But it would take between 15 to 20 years to neuter both of these countries. And that would mean that potentially a total from 100 million to 3 to 400 million deaths. Keep in mind, if I am correct, the world population is 6.4 billion. That's huge. That's over 5% of the population wiped out. Just gone. And if I got to figure out. That is that is 6.25% of the entire world population just gone. Gone. That's crazy to think about. 5 to 6%. Let me put this in perspective, people. World War II, our world's most destructive conflict, killed only 2.5%. And if I recall, we had only like maybe 2 billion people at that time. That's crazy to think about. That's like, this is completely different. 3 to 400 million across the entire globe, just gone. The Allies, I still think would win. They still would win, but the losses, would it be worth it? Because now they're weakened, and if another power comes in, they can't stop that power. They can't stop them. So this is why it's like, would it even be worth fighting the Zionist Union? Sure, they could win, and sure, they could just say, you no longer exist. Just, I sentence you to the shadow realm. You don't exist anymore. It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, they got their wish, causing the collapse of the Western world. And they'd get it either way. But the one thing they don't want is a nuclear apocalypse. And that wouldn't cause the West to collapse. It would just limit their abilities to use nukes. It wouldn't change anything. And they know this. So that's why when the West always goes for the nukes, they're like, okay, we back down, we concede, because they know that's not a part of the game and they can't win the game. That's why the West has atomic bombs and they don't. They can't win the same game the West is playing. So, how do I say, as a final send off, the Zionist Union, if, and this is a very big if they can keep the Zelbians out of the war, they'll win. They will legitimately win the war. But they have to keep the Zelbians out of the war, or they overwhelm the Allies so fast that they can't see what's going on. That's the only way for them to win, other than that. Because they've got 8 months to up to a full year before the Zelbians mobilize and start sending troops. They've got a full year. And knowing how the Soviet Union did, I really don't think the Zionist Union could do it. I just don't see it happening. So I would say that in the worst case, in the best case scenario, the Allies would take the massive dub. If the Zelbians don't enter the war, regardless of whether the Ottoman Empire joins or not, the Allies will still be on the back pedal. They will still be on the back pedal, and if they make bad choices, then what would happen is a Crimson Army victory. So it's a matter of the smart choices being made mixed in with the mindset. Who has the mindset to win the war? Now that that's finally done and dusted, I can finally get back to what I was doing before. And so, as I say with everything else, if you guys like this, you don't have to subscribe, don't have to like, don't have to do any of that. But if you really want to see more, or even have a request, please tell me what you want to see. Because I really want to show what this universe really is about. It's not just about 20th century alternate history on another world. It's not just about that. It's about the universe that's being created. So, got anything else to say? I've got nothing else. And you finally know better that the Crimson Army actually can win the conflict. They just have to play their cards right and force the Allies to show their hands way before the war starts. If they do that, there is a possibility they could win. So until then, I will see you guys later, and hopefully I can get to my editor today before I have to go back to work tomorrow. And that's the thing. I do like what I do. I like what I do. And even as when I worked in security, like I was like, okay, I gotta wake up tomorrow. Now I'm much more excited to go to work because this is something I've always wanted to do. Now I'm excited. And it's not the same excitement as I did with security. It's not the same. And it's because, unlike security, this is something I genuinely wanted to do since I was a little boy. A little boy. And now I'm doing it. Security was chosen by circumstance. This is the right step for my future. And so I think this is going to be a completely different situation. And I truly do believe that this will end very well. So I hope to see you guys in this situation somehow, and I really, 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 really hope that not only this universe works, but my job is stable and everything gets right back to where it is. And I will see you guys next time.